So I want to talk about healthy aging in context, just in terms of it being a specific challenge that I think, as we've heard this morning on several occasions, needs not only collaboration within the context of the US, and I live here in the US and have done for 20 years in California now, but on a worldwide basis. The whole planet is got healthy aging issues, and even Africa and the Middle East perhaps have the youngest population on the planet, but even they are planning for individuals in the long term as well. For those of us in a lot of other parts of the world, we've already got large populations of older adults with us, and I want to talk about that a little bit. Next slide. A busy slide, but I just wanted to make sure we anchored to this whole area we call healthy aging. And you're going to hear after my talk from Brad Sherman more about demography as a general issue. But it's actually only in recent times that we've talked about older adults as a particular population. Perhaps 1881 was a seminal year when Chancellor Bismarck in Germany actually introduced a pension aid to create this whole category called retirement, which he created at 70, knowing full well that the average German died at 60. So he wasn't going to cost the state any money back then. He himself lived till he was 83, so he benefited personally. But it did create a whole trend for the rest of the world to follow. Of course, life expectancy, as low as it was in Germany at the time, didn't move much for many years, largely because we were still fixing issues around infectious diseases, early mortality problems in terms of birth. So in 1901, the life expectancy was 52. By 1921, it was 54. It only moved 2 years. By 1945, the end of the Second World War, it was 64. We were pushing up. And then, of course, we had a period where we were starting to cure many diseases and really get on top of this. And at least in the Western world now, we have a 79-year life expectancy and 73 in the world as a whole right now. But of course, we're now expecting individuals that were born from 2000 onwards to potentially live until they're 100. And we've heard this morning about genomics and genetics and some of those things that might drive that change. But that's a relatively recent history. What that means is that we now have a population of people, a burgeoning population of people that are truly in their older adult years. Next slide. Of course, the other thing that you're going to hear through all the speakers this afternoon is there's many facets of healthy aging we could have concentrated on. And now there are many, many books that are written on this subject. We're going to take an angle on a few of these. One of the themes is going to be that there is this large population and it's growing. You're going to hear about the falling birth rate. You're going to hear about the emphasis on not only increased lifespan, but increased health span, and people starting to understand that term for the first time. The years that I lived without any disease during my life. We're going to hear a little bit about discretionary spending in terms of people who now, whether they've retired or not, have different needs as they grow older than perhaps they had when they were in their younger years. And of course, these subjects are dealt with in many books. I've included a few of them here, including The Super Age by Brad Sherman, who will be talking to you after me. But there are many others that are writing about this, perhaps for the first time now. Because we have this large population of people that can consume these things. Next slide. Of course, one of the things I want to make sure that we do is not focus wholly on our own backyard, wherever we may come from. We have people in the audience from the US, from Europe, and in some cases other places in the world. So in this presentation, you're going to hear from other parts of the world in terms of their challenges. And as you can see on this map, the issue of aging is different demographically, both in terms of the volume of people and the GDP in those countries right now to solve for some of those issues. So what have they got by way of infrastructure? Again, we heard about earlier on. But I think the fact is the world can collaborate on this because there are commonalities to the challenge. Next slide. This also shows that the world itself is changing from a population perspective. We tend to think somewhat parochially that the States, with its big population, is going to stay the same for the next 50 years. We know that not to be true, and you're going to hear from Ravi Bala later, for example, where India, which has just overtaken China in population, will continue to grow. China shrinks. A country like Japan massively shrinks from where it's been historically to where it's going to go. We need to take account of that just in terms of our thinking. Next slide. The other thing that we're going to talk about as best we can is that aging has many dimensions in terms of what constitutes healthy aging. This was a map that McKinsey put together about 6 months ago. It's got many facets to it that I'm not going to go into, but I think we have a lot of work to do to unpack what it is we want to solve for in this whole space, and we're going to hear about some of that during the course of the afternoon. Next slide. I put this chart together because I thought it was a rather simpler way of representing some of the categories that I think are in the mix of things that are worth innovating about. So as you'll see from the category headings across the top, older adults have got issues around personal security and safety, around accessibility. They've got them around their own personal mobility and transportation. They've got them around the technology that they use, around how do they pursue better physical wellness, better mental wellness, how they self-actualize in terms of enjoy their increased lifespan and health span life. As a subset of that, there are many issues we could talk about. We're going to touch on some of those, but I think it starts to show the breadth and the depth of the topic that we're trying to dig into in a very short period this afternoon. Next slide. Of course, I want to just briefly mention technology. It's going to pepper the conversation in as much as we know technology has been a theme all morning, can help in so many ways, and technology has many subsets to it. But of course, it's only part of the answer. We need to introduce technology intelligently. We need to introduce it frictionlessly, not only to the older adult user, but the caregiver community, to clinicians, hospital systems, whoever it may be. So I think we have to think about it holistically, and we have to think about it in very broad terms. We can't just think that technology in and of itself is an end that will solve for a lot of the challenges that we face. Next slide. Almost lastly, the last thing I really wanted to talk about is that I think aging as a subject area deserves its own attention. Right now, the impact of a growing population in many countries now, and one to come in many others, has everything you can see on this slide in terms of impact. It affects the way business is done. It affects the way wars are fought, shortages of water. I mean, you can read the slide for yourself. So I think it's got a massive impact in many subject areas. So aging in and of itself isn't isolated from implications from other issues we need to be thinking about that are both intended consequences and unintended consequences of getting older and living longer, quite simply. So we need to make sure we envelope all of those. Next slide. Of course, we've actually got the UN very much focused on worldwide issues, not unlike that last list with its 17 directives you can see on this particular slide. Some of these at first blush you might think are not necessarily anything to do with aging, but when you think about it, they are implicated, of course, and they are consequential. The very first one, no poverty, directive number 1, for example, and its relation zero hunger. In a burgeoning population of older adults, those things are clearly impacted. Right now, aging and healthy aging tends to sit under the Directive 3, which is good health and well-being. I think in and of itself, it is a huge part of Directive 3 because it impacts on pretty much all 17 that you see on that slide. And next slide. So I think in summary, I would say, just as part of my contextual remarks before Brad comes up, that I think our model for aging and retirement is hugely outdated. Whatever Bismarck had in his mind isn't relevant today in the way that it perhaps was, and maybe it wasn't that relevant in the first place. And perhaps it's not about age anymore at all. Maybe it's about stage. Maybe it's about the stage in life we're at and the demography and the psychography that goes with being at different stages of our life and what solutions we need through those stages. We've added to them. This is not now a Thomas Hobbesian world in which life is nasty, brutish, and short. We now have a life that can be pleasant and uplifting and exciting and long for many people if we understand the stages through which people go. And I think that's one of the things that I wanted to at least contextually say. And I think innovation is one of those great drivers with technology as a subset to help get there. And perhaps it's time to have maybe one more directive on the UN list of 17 as a call to action, since we had a bit of that this morning. Perhaps there's an 18th, and it is healthy aging.